Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, your girl Annie. We're here to talk about a wild case today because it's got like House of Horrors meets teen sex cult, meets, what would you do for love? It's got like all of these insane, crazy details. But I gotta warn you, okay? If you just ate, maybe take a pause, take a beat. Don't watch this yet, like let it all digest. And if you're about to eat, don't. Don't. The only thing you should be doing right now is something that makes you feel just incredibly zen, okay? Whether that's cleaning, vacuuming, I guess you wouldn't be able to hear anything. Scrubbing a toilet, just like really getting in there, laying down on your couch with your comfy socks, whatever it is, because this is gonna take you on a wild ride and it's gonna make you feel a little bit queasy. I'm just going to be honest. So without further ado, guys, we are going to jump right in. Okay, I want to talk with you guys about something that I have chatted with you about before, and it's debt. Because debt, it doesn't just like break in, it creeps in like a snake. I mean, a missed payment, a second notice, a call maybe that you ignore. And you tell yourself, okay, it's okay, you're fine, until you're not. One day your accounts might be locked, your wages are getting garnished and start to disappear, and the future that you had planned out for yourself, it starts to feel out of reach. And that's why I want to tell you about PDS debt, because they go way beyond just the numbers, and they actually understand your unique situation. And then they use that information to create a plan that is designed just for you. There's no minimum credit score required, there's no judgment, just real solutions to help you pay off your debt even faster and finally get ahead. PDS debt is also A+ rated by the Better Business Bureau, and they have thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and on Trustpilot. They've already helped hundreds of thousands of people escape debt, ranging from credit cards to loans, even medical bills. And they can help you too. You're just 30 seconds away from being debt-free. Get your free debt assessment now at pdsdebt.com/10tolife. That's pdsdebt.com/10tolife. Don't wait. Take control today. In 2008, Susan Bailey lived in Roanoke, Texas. She was 43 years old. She had long hair, which was right on the border between blonde and brunette. She tended to wear it straight, and she was a very happy woman. Now, even though Roanoke wasn't exactly her dream home, not by any means, it was basically exactly what she needed at that time in her life. See, Susan was a single mom with 2 kids, and her house was on a street that had a lot of families and children. So a bunch of them liked it there because it was like this great neighborhood, a lot of children, a lot of families. There was also this huge park right across the street. And when Susan's kids were young, they would always run over there. They would always play at the park and make new friends. So the neighborhood was basically perfect for families who had little kids. Now again, it wasn't Susan's dream come true, but as we can all know and agree on, I'm sure, that when you're a parent, you want to give your kids the absolute best life possible. So in turn, sometimes you make little sacrifices here and there because you want to give them the best. Give up one personal dream or something like that so that your family can pursue a different dream. Now, Susan had grown up just outside of St. Paul, Minnesota, in a small town, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody else. And if you think about your stereotypical Midwest small town, where it's safe and small and quiet, that was basically Susan's life when she was little. Now, one time in the mid-'80s, when Susan was probably in her early 20s or so, this horrible snowstorm hit Minnesota. And it actually was a bunch of different snowstorms kind of back to back, like they all hit in a row and they just hit the state one after the next. But it was literally impossible for her to get to work because the roads were just so bad. Nobody was like driving in or commuting. It was at that point that Susan basically told her parents, I am done living in the snow. I am done with ice. I am done with the cold. I'm moving somewhere warm, and I'm going to do that before next winter would even begin because I don't want to deal with this again. Within that next year, she ended up moving to California, specifically Riverside, which Riverside is east of Los Angeles, far enough away to not really be part of LA. It's like further inland of Orange County too, but it's close enough that you can get to the city pretty quickly if you want to. A lot of people do commute into LA for work. So even though Susan had been born and raised in the Midwest, she pretty quickly realized that she was a California girl at heart. She loved the warm weather. She loved having that warm weather all year long too. There was no snow, really, ever. She also loved wearing pink every day like a California Barbie. I mean, it was just perfect for her. Now, she was also glad to finally get her own place that was far enough away from her parents. But that wasn't the main thing that she loved about California. She also met somebody, and his name was Richard Bailey. Now, he was actually born and bred California, and he was this short, dark-haired guy. I mean, very good looking, though. And he kind of had this, like, California air about him, this California attitude. He didn't really care about authority or respecting his elders, which I gotta say was pretty surprising because he was literally serving in the Air Force at that time. Now, Susan and Richard didn't date for very long until they finally realized they were meant for each other, they were in love, and they ended up eloping in the spring of 1988. And I would guess, arguably, that was probably because Susan's parents didn't actually like Richard. They thought that he was rude. They didn't think that he showed them enough respect when he would go and meet up with them and hang out with them in person. They just kind of figured that Susan could do better. Now, there was just one major hiccup and major problem in all of this. And not Richard being disrespectful to Susan's parents, like I mentioned before, no. But like I mentioned, he was enlisted with the Air Force. And I know that there are a lot of military spouses who are watching this right now. And you know that that life is difficult. You know way better than me, but I've heard from you guys. And part of the part that makes it so difficult is that you're constantly getting new orders. You have to move from this base to this base, now go to this one, and you just pick up everything and go somewhere new. And it's constantly changing. And on, it just kind of went move to move to move. And then once Richard finally retired from the Air Force, he worked for a while in the Coast Guard because, I don't know, apparently this guy couldn't get enough of enlistment after another. I don't know. But it was just a lot of, constant changing, constant uprooting, and kind of a big adjustment. Now, along the way, he and Susan had 2 children. Jennifer was born in 1990, and then 5 years later, along came baby David. Now, growing up, Jennifer was a very good student, also very artsy. She would sketch for fun, she would read books, and she had a very good relationship with her mom, Susan. She was good. She didn't really ever get into any sort of trouble whatsoever. And it was sort of like having the kid that you don't have to really worry about. They can kind of just be independent, do their thing, and you can trust that they're making the right decisions. And in fact, Jennifer was kind of also a little bit of a loner. I mean, not like she was horribly bullied or anything like that, but she really seemed like one of those people who was more interested in hanging out alone, reading her books, doing her own thing, rather than ever trying to get popular. And for most of high school, she never even dated. She never went to parties, and she seemed totally fine and content with that. She didn't mind that kind of life at all. Now, as for David, this was very much one of those situations where the younger kid looks up to their big sister and wants to be exactly like her. So he, like her, liked drawing, liked sketching. He also read a lot. He was always going to the library, I mean, literally all the time, because every time he would finish each book, he would just read it, and he would always want something new, and just constantly new book after one after another. But then things changed around 2006 because this was when the family was living in Roanoke, Texas. They had finally settled down and finally put new roots down. And see, by this point, Susan and Richard had been married for 18 years. But things were not going well. Richard hadn't worked or held down a job since 1990 when he retired from the Coast Guard. He was home all day, every day, while Susan was working to support the entire family. And things started getting very tense. So they ended up getting a divorce in 2006, and Susan kept custody of the kids while Richard agreed to pay child support. And Susan was working retail, which I think we all know retail jobs are not really known for their big paychecks. I worked retail for freaking eons, and it's a hustle, it's a grind. So even with Richard chipping in, Susan just could not support the family without working these endless hours, just constantly grinding and trying to make ends meet. Now, David was 13 at this time, and Jennifer was 17, which is definitely old enough to understand that money, it doesn't grow on trees, right? It's like you gotta work for it, you've gotta earn it. But for whatever reason, I don't know, maybe they were being a little bit selfish, maybe they were lashing out about the divorce because they were angry, I don't know. But they started getting very resentful of their mom. They thought that it was so unfair that she was never home, never spent any time with them, that they didn't have all the trimmings and the trappings of all of this wealth and things like that. Yet the reason that she was never home was because she wanted to support them. It's not like she was going out to parties or hitting the bars or going out with friends, having some sort of midlife crisis. It wasn't anything like that. But basically nothing that she ever did was good enough for Jennifer and David. And that's all annoying enough, right? I mean, a couple of honestly, spoiled little shits that they can't even be grateful for their parents' sacrifice. But I guess that also comes with teenage years. I know I was kind of a dick. So, sorry, I should have used a different word, but I was. And if you're thinking I'm being unfair by calling them spoiled, I mean, just get this, okay? Money was tight, and I think I've made that clear. And because of that, the kids understood that they had to stick to a budget. They were all on like a family plan for their cell phones. This was, way back in the day too, when companies put a cap on how many minutes you used or your data plan and all that. You couldn't just like talk for free and use as much internet as you possibly wanted. There were like limits, and if you went over, it was like $1 million for every extra minute or every extra internet usage. It was insane. I remember one of my bills for Verizon was like $499 because I used like, I don't know, a half hour of internet. It's astronomical. And basically, if you spent too long talking or texting or browsing, these companies would just charge you all of these astronomical fees on top of what you usually paid every single month. And Jennifer started calling and texting basically everyone she knew all the time. And David was always online way more than what that plan allowed. So one month, they literally ran up that phone bill to $1,500, which that would be a tough amount of money for anybody to come up with, especially not just being a single parent with multiple jobs trying to support your kids. Like, that is a grip of money. Now, Jennifer was also overdrawing her checking account. She was like overdrafting. She was racking up the overdraft fees that come with it, which I think is like $25 per transaction, just really making no effort whatsoever to keep costs down. Which, is this your typical, like, not teenage rebellion, but like being oblivious to, adult problems and what things really are? Or is this something deeper? Is this a sign that they are way more selfish? Well, things only got worse when Jennifer started dating a guy from her high school named Paul Henson. Now, he was 1 year younger than her, so she was 17 and he was 16. Now, even though they went to the same school together, Paul lived right outside of town in a trailer. And they lived kind of an awkward distance away from one another. I mean, close, but too far for either one of them to ever walk to each other's houses. However, they could ride bikes back and forth. So that's exactly what they would do. Paul would take his bike to Jennifer's house, or she would take her bike over to his, and they would spend time together. Then they would go back home. And they had one really big thing in common. Both of them had divorced parents, with one parent basically completely out of the picture. See, Jennifer didn't really see a whole lot of her dad Richard anymore, and Paul didn't have much contact with his mom. He was being raised by his dad, Paul Sr. Now, Susan, her mom, did not like Jennifer's boyfriend, Paul, at all. She thought that he was weird. She thought that he was like too bizarre. And I don't mean that in a normal teenage kind of way. Like maybe he dressed in a way that she didn't like, or he listened to like punk music or, hardcore music or something like that. Although both those things were true. But also he just struck her as kind of off in one of those ways that's really difficult to put your finger on. Plus, it seemed like Jennifer seemed to want to get way too serious with Paul way too fast. She was a senior in high school. She was getting college acceptance letters in the mail. She should have been focused on what she was going to do next with her life and putting high school behind her. But instead, it seemed like she was almost letting her new boyfriend hold her back. So Susan told Jennifer how she felt, how she didn't want Jennifer to basically be spending so much of her time with Paul. But it also was like kind of history repeating itself all over again. If you remember, Susan's parents didn't like her husband Richard. She married him anyway. Now it seemed like the more Susan tried to make it clear to her daughter that she didn't approve of Paul, the more committed Jennifer was to him. It was just this like vicious cycle. And I mean, seriously, it was like there was nothing this guy could do that would make Jennifer dump him. She stuck with him through everything. And take this for example. This is an absolutely insane story. But right around the same time that Jennifer and Paul started dating, he got very close to a freshman from the high school. Now, this freshman's identity has not been released to the public. However, most of the reporters who have covered this story have used the same fake name to identify her. That's Marilee. So that's what I'm going to call her as I describe this situation to you, Marilee. So anyways, Marilee absolutely looked up to Paul completely, like idolized him. He seemed mysterious, dark, a little bit spooky, but in a good way. So they started spending more time together. And eventually, Paul was kind of like, hey, we should date. And Marilee was super excited about that. She was down. She liked Paul. She was excited about this. And even though she knew that he had a girlfriend already, she was in. She wanted to date him. And get this, then the two of them, they didn't go behind Jennifer's back. They didn't sneak around. They actually told Jennifer about this, told Jennifer that they were going to be together. And you might think that that would be the end of things for Jennifer. He literally admitted to cheating on her with Marilee. Except get this, he did like, I don't know if it was like a gaslighting technique or like the smartest thing I've ever heard for such a young guy to do, but he said, "Oh, no, I'm not cheating on you. I have a personality disorder. I have multiple personalities, so my other personality wants to date her while I'll continue to date you." I mean, guys, make it make sense. Like, this guy either was a genius or maybe something was unbalanced. I don't know. But he basically said, like, no, me, Paul, I had to say that, like, me, Paul, sorry. Me as Paul, I'm fully committed to you, Jennifer, whereas this other guy, which he called Talos, he's in love with Marilee. So that's what the setup is. I'm not cheating on you. So since they were completely different people, according to him, he said he shouldn't have been blamed for having two separate girlfriends. Okay? Now, I'm just going to say the symptoms for multiple personality disorder are pretty specific. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm nothing even close to that. But Paul, he didn't actually act like somebody with that condition. He acted more like a Hollywood version of what you would expect if somebody was faking having multiple personalities. And look, I'm not saying that I know for sure that Paul was lying. I always say, do your own research, make your own judgment calls. But also, I'd be willing to call bull if somebody is making a pretty dramatic claim that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But of course, Jennifer and Marilee didn't know all of that. Paul, and I'm just going to keep calling him Paul because I don't think that this like Talos guy ever existed. He was just kind of like, I'm not a cheater. Don't dump me. I love both of you, or my personalities love both of you. And both of them stayed with him. But from there, things got even more weird. I mean, very weird, because I get it was already pretty weird, but it got even more bizarre. See, in addition to pretending that he had this other personality named Talos, Paul also told some pretty crazy stories about this alleged other personality of his. Because according to Paul, Talos wasn't some other person that just was made up by his unconscious mind. Not even close, because get this, Paul believed that Talos was a real physical person who was alive back in the 1700s, that he worked as an executioner, an honest-to-God, historical person who somehow got his soul stuck in a 16-year-old boy from Texas's body. And again, bizarre, alarming, bizarre. Now, Paul also said that he believed in reincarnation, and he really wanted to spend all of his lives with both just Jennifer and Marilee. Not just this life, the one he was living right now, but all of his lives. And he told both of his girlfriends that if they spent all their time together and never let anything come between them, then they would get to be reborn together, and they would all be able to spend their next life together too. So Jennifer and Marilee were kind of, I guess, like, yeah, we're all in. We'll spend our entire existence together, basically following you around, being your two girlfriends. Also, we can have the chance to do this over and over and over again the next time that we're reborn. I don't know, it sounds to me like my literal worst nightmare, but apparently to them it seemed appealing and exciting. So then once the three of them continued these relationships, they kind of inherently started becoming more like a throuple. And Jennifer and Marilee actually became best friends. They weren't just tolerating their boyfriend's behavior anymore or their boyfriend's other girlfriend, but they actually really liked each other too. So then the three of them started having threesomes, and sometimes Paul would be like, hey, I want to be with you both, even though supposedly, he only loved Jennifer and didn't have any feelings for Marilee in that personality. But then later he would say he was Talos, and even though he now loved Marilee and not Jennifer, he still thought that for whatever reason they needed to do a threesome together. And apparently, at least one time, he was having sex with Jennifer as Paul, and then part of the way through, he supposedly turned into Talos. Then Marilee accused Talos of cheating, since Talos was only supposed to come out when she was around. I mean, it was this huge, complicated, very confusing mess. And it was bad enough that even their parents could tell that something was off, which I mentioned before, how Susan didn't like Paul. She didn't even know half of this weirdness that was going on and all of the screwed up games that he was playing, but she could still tell that he was very bad news. So then it kind of reached a boiling point, and once it was obvious to Jennifer that Susan was not going to support her relationship, she started running away. Because remember, she thought that she had to spend as much time as humanly possible around Paul, all in order to be reincarnated and be with him again. So if Susan wasn't going to approve, it became very important to her that she was going to be with her boyfriend behind her mom's back. Now, each time this happened, she would get caught by Paul's dad because the place that she was always running away to was Paul's house. It wasn't like they were going to some private apartment or private home. And it's not like Paul's dad was going to just like fail to notice this whole extra person who would just like show up at the house and stay there. So Paul Sr. would see Jennifer in his trailer late at night, later than Susan would ever be okay with it, or she would be there sometimes in the mornings too, and it was clear that she had spent the night, and he would tell Jennifer, like, look, get in my car, I'm going to drive you back home to your mom's house, you can't keep doing this, you can't stay here. But then other times, Paul would come over to Jennifer's house and stay there. And that actually worked out well for the two of them because Susan was working so much. So it was actually pretty easy for Paul to come over, spend some time with Jennifer, and then be out of the house again before Susan could even get home or realize what was going on. But this still was not enough for Jennifer, Marilee, or Paul. I guess they were all sick of sneaking around and they didn't want their parents telling them what to do anymore. I don't know, but because it erupted into this like, you can't tell us not to be together, you can't tell us what to do anymore, we want to come and go as we please, it escalated and they all decided that they needed to kill their parents. Then once they did that, they needed to take all of their money, use that money, and flee to Canada. And then that is where they would start a new life and live happily ever after. Now seriously, it wasn't just like, oh, two of us are about to turn 18, we'll be living on our own, we'll leave home, we'll live our own lives. It wasn't anything like that. It wasn't even like, let's kill Jennifer's mom, Susan, because she's the big problem, and we'll leave our parents alone, like she's the only one that's like creating an issue here. Because let's all be clear, they basically all saw Susan as the enemy, since Susan by this time was actually forbidding Jennifer from seeing Paul. But that's not how they approached it at all. Not that that would make it okay, but like maybe you could understand their thought process a little bit more. But instead they wanted everybody killed. And in Marilee's case, she didn't even have a bad relationship with her mom. At least she didn't until Marilee started dating Paul and also getting involved with Jennifer. But before that point, Marilee and her mom had been very close. The issue was that Marilee's mom didn't approve of Paul either, basically for the same reasons that Susan didn't like Jennifer and Paul being together either. And Marilee felt like if she had to choose between either her mom or her two lovers, that she was going to go all in with Jennifer and Paul. She was going to go along with the plan just so that she could keep being with them. Now, as for Paul, Paul's dad actually really liked Jennifer. He knew that Paul's mental health wasn't exactly, great, and he thought that because of that, Jennifer was good at keeping him grounded, keeping him calm. But he was also sick of Paul sneaking around and Jennifer sneaking around and Susan always calling and wanting to know if he knew where the kids were and things like that. I mean, it was obvious to him that the two of them were up to no good, and because of that, he was also not the most supportive of the relationship, which I also don't think that he knew everything about Marilee either, but the parts that he did know about, he wasn't a fan. But he wasn't like this huge roadblock in their relationship. But apparently it was enough for them that Paul, Jennifer, and Marilee decided he needed to go too. And these three teens didn't just decide to commit these murders on their own, but instead they brought in a fourth person to conspire to do all of this. Namely, the person who had looked up to Jennifer for so much of his life, Jennifer's younger brother, David. Now, by this time, David was just 14 years old, and he was having a really difficult time. I'm not sure on the specifics. I don't know if this was about him being just a moody teenager, or if he was still hurt and upset by his parents' divorce. I don't know what it was. But I do know that just like how Jennifer and Susan had been fighting a lot, David and Susan had also been having more and more arguments, really about every little thing. Now, I can't imagine being so upset by a parent's divorce that I would literally decide to kill them over it, but David was all in on that plan. So he, Jennifer, Paul, and Marilee decided they were going to work together to kill Marilee's mom, Paul's dad and stepmom, and most important of all, David and Jennifer's mom, Susan. And in fact, in their plan, they wanted Susan to die first. But the big question was how they would do it. And one idea that they had right off of the bat, get this, was that they should electrocute her. The idea was that they would take an electric cord and then cut one end of it so that it would be frayed. Then they would hang it in the shower/bathtub area so that the next time Susan was in there taking a shower or taking a bath, she would get this fatal shock. Now, I'm guessing that the assumption was that they would be able to rig it in a way that would be easy to really tuck the cord out of sight so that it wouldn't be visible when Susan first got into the tub. I mean, obviously, if she saw it, she would know better and she wouldn't get in and she wouldn't turn on the water. But also, they even planned to hide the cable after Susan was dead so that the police wouldn't see it. And Jennifer, Paul, and Marilee and David kind of figured that first responders would just show up, see their mom dead in the shower, wouldn't see the cord in sight, and they would rule it as a heart attack, which they were all young, I get that, but I guess they also have never heard of autopsies. But in addition to that plan, they also had another backup plan in mind, just in case that one didn't work. And that backup plan was way more hands-on, because they figured that they would just beat Susan to death, or at least maybe even beat her unconscious, and then put her in the tub and do the original electrocution plan. Now again, they seemed to think that nobody would notice if she had bruises or cuts or broken bones or things that indicated a beating. All of the signs that police would definitely see in a beaten, burnt body in a tub full of water. I don't get it. Like, they literally thought that we'll do all of this and they'll just come in and be like, yep, heart attack, check. I mean, it makes no sense. And tell me, does it sound as ridiculous to you as it does to me? I mean, clearly, we're not talking about criminal masterminds over here. That's true a lot of the time. I think it's safe to say that murderers are just not smart as a general rule, especially bring teenagers into the fold. But this was their plan. This was what they were thinking was going to work. And I guess the kids eventually did realize that their plan sucked, because ultimately they ended up trying to kill Susan a different way. Apparently, she was a huge fan of chocolate pudding. So one night, Jennifer made her this big pot of pudding, and she crushed a bunch of pills into it. The hope was that when Susan ate it, she would overdose. However, Susan only actually ended up having one bite of the pudding. It tasted terrible, so she wasn't going to eat anymore, and it was actually so terrible because of all of those crushed up pills. That's what she was tasting, although of course she didn't realize at the time what it was. So Susan just kind of asked Jennifer, like, hey, what have you done different to make this batch turn out so bad? And Jennifer made some sort of excuse about how, okay, maybe the milk went bad, maybe I didn't follow directions completely, I don't really know. But she definitely didn't throw out that she had poisoned the pudding. She said, put it in the fridge, maybe try it again later, maybe it just needs to cool or whatever. Then came September 19th, 2008. It was a Friday, and Marilee went over to Jennifer's house to stay with her. Now, neither girl told their parents where they were. For Marilee's mom, it was just like her daughter had gone to school and then never came home. And Susan was busy with work and everything else, and she didn't even notice that Marilee was there at all that Friday night. She also didn't see Marilee around on Saturday or Sunday. Now, what's weird is Marilee's mom didn't even report her as missing, and by this time, apparently, it was kind of just normal for Marilee to take off, to go see Paul and Jennifer without having any permission. So Marilee's mom wasn't actually even worried about Marilee's safety or anything like that. However, she was pissed because she thought that Marilee just ran off again to be with her couple or her boyfriend and that she was just being a brat. But still, she did want to find her. She did want to know where she was. So all weekend long, Marilee's mom spent every free minute that she had driving up and down the streets all over Roanoke and all of the other towns in the area too, just looking for her daughter. And then, finally, she struck gold on Monday because Marilee was just walking down the street in Jennifer's neighborhood. So her mom pulled over and said, hey, get in my car right now. Like, what the hell are you doing? So then, after she gets in the car, her mom tried to be a little bit nicer, a little bit more supportive. She asked Marilee to explain what was going on, where she had been, what's up, because Marilee at this point was also acting very, very upset. She was crying, and she started going on and on about how she was going to be reincarnated and be with Paul in another life. She had this plan, and it was going to be hard, but she had to go through with it. So basically, she was confessing to everything that was going on. However, her mom, it sounded bizarre, so her mom didn't really take her seriously, because to her, it sounded mostly like nonsense. Mostly because it actually was, nonsense. I mean, crap about past lives, future lives, being together from the 1700s, all of these things. So anyway, Marilee was very upset, and she did not stop crying all night long, all through dinner, all before bed. And then after she was supposed to be going to sleep, she just laid in her room even longer, just sobbing all night long, loud enough that her mom could hear her through the walls. Somehow, though, her mom did eventually manage to fall asleep. So she woke up again on the morning of Tuesday, September 23rd. Now, the reason that she woke up wasn't because her alarm had gone off or anything like that, but it was because her bed was shaking. Someone was beside her in the bed, shaking it or bumping up against it. So Marilee's mom opened her eyes, and that's when she saw Marilee standing over her with a knife, like some sort of horror movie villain, just shaking the bed and just like, there's your daughter standing over you with a knife. She had, luckily, just enough time to kind of like scoot away, get off on the other side of the bed, and she grabbed her cell phone and she called 911. Now, apparently this call was insane because, of course, she wanted the police to come help her, but she was also in mom mode, trying to figure out what Marilee was actually trying to do and why. So she shouted, "Put that knife down. What the hell do you think you're doing?" But in the meantime, Marilee was the one saying she needed her mom's phone. She said she was going to take the car and she was going to drive off. And she kept repeating things like, "I have to go with them. I have to go with them. We were all supposed to go and you ruined it." Then, apparently, there was some kind of struggle, and the operator could hear it on the line. And then afterward, Marilee's mom said that she managed to get the knife away from Marilee, but saying, "I'm not in danger anymore, but the police need to still come here, come to the house right away." So Marilee was arrested and charged with aggravated robbery, which, I'm not going to lie, didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, yes, she was trying to, I guess, technically rob her mom, take her phone and her car, but it doesn't really seem like the most relevant issue with what happened that day. The good news is, though, the police eventually updated the charges to aggravated assault, which probably makes way more sense and is probably what, honestly, they should have charged her with from the very beginning. During the questioning the next day, Marilee said a lot of the same kinds of things that she had said to her mom when she had picked her up in the car the other day, like the crazy, plan is in motion, that she needs to get the car, she needs to go to Canada. She kept repeating things over and over again, saying, the plan, it was to go to Canada, I needed to go, I'm late. And honestly, I wish that the cops had kept questioning her to figure out what that all meant, what that whole plan was, but they didn't. And instead, Marilee's murder attempt didn't work, but Paul was up next, because around that same time, although I'm not exactly sure on the exact date, Paul stole his dad's gun, and he planned to sit in his trailer, wait for his dad and his stepmom to come home from work, and then shoot each of them the second they walked in the door. Simple, straightforward, easy. Except what Paul didn't know was that on the exact day that he was planning to shoot them, his parents made a spur-of-the-moment decision to go out on a date night, spontaneous, go out, have some fun. So instead of going home after work, the two of them ended up meeting up at a restaurant and having dinner together. Then they went and saw a movie together. And they ended up staying out hours later than they usually would have. And they never called Paul to explain why they weren't coming home yet, which, I gotta say, it was a good call because Paul was just sitting in their trailer with a gun planning to kill them. And since he didn't know where they were, he eventually got bored and sick of waiting. So he put the gun away and he gave up on his whole murder plan entirely. Now keep in mind, at this time, the police had no idea that this whole conspiracy even existed. They knew that Marilee had attacked her mother, but they didn't realize that anybody else was involved in this plan. They figured that she was probably just throwing a tantrum, lashing out at her mom, doing, the angry teenager thing, something like that. And obviously Paul's parents had no idea what he had been planning either. They hadn't reported anything about the attempted shooting because they didn't even know that it was a thing. And Susan also didn't know that she had been poisoned yet or attempted to be poisoned with that pudding yet. So all of these things were going on simultaneously, but nobody knew that they were connected at all. And this was all in spite of the fact that the kids' behavior was just getting more and more alarming. On the exact same day that Marilee tried stabbing her mom, so I'm going back a little bit now to September 23rd, David also brought a knife to school with him. Now, he didn't try to hurt anyone with it, thank God, but he also wasn't hiding it or trying to hide it. He was showing it off to his friends. Eventually, somebody told a teacher, and David ended up getting suspended for 3 days for bringing that weapon to school, which, thank God. But also on that day, Paul was reported missing to the police. Now, this is after his whole, waiting in the trailer with the gun night. He had actually been missing for a few days at that point, but it's like what I said before. He would always kind of just vanish for a few days at a time, turn up at his girlfriend's house, and then, come back. It was like clockwork. So Paul's dad, Paul Sr., didn't really worry when his son just would up and disappear. But now, it apparently had been enough days that he was getting a little concerned. Plus, there was that gun missing from his house, and Paul Sr. was dealing with a growing suspicion that his son had been the one who had taken it. So finally, he called the police. Now, it took until the next day, Wednesday the 24th, for the police to track Paul down. And in a surprise to absolutely nobody, he was at Jennifer's house, of course. When the cops got there, it wasn't quite 9 a.m. yet, and everyone was still at home, including Susan. And at first, she was surprised to hear that the police even thought that Paul was there because she hadn't noticed him. And Jennifer also had said that Paul wasn't there either. So because they said they hadn't seen him, because they didn't know things, and because neither of them consented to let the detectives search the house, the officers just left. And then later in the evening, more police showed up at Susan's house again. They were still looking for Paul, still thought that he was there. Now, the last time that the police had come knocking, it worked out pretty well for Paul to just kind of stay hidden, out of sight, and let Susan and Jennifer get rid of the cops for whatever reason. But for whatever reason this time, he was panicked. So Paul ran out of the house, and of course the officers saw him running, but he ran away too fast before they could ever catch him. Then one of the investigators went inside to basically be like, hey, guess what? We found a runaway here. We have some questions. So he ended up having a pretty tense conversation with Susan and Jennifer both, because it seemed as though they had been lying. But maybe they weren't. Maybe Susan really didn't know. So Susan said, I knew something was up. You've had it so easy. You have all the freedom you want. I don't know what the hell is going on. And later on, Susan also yelled at Jennifer and asked, so you and Paul were what, gonna run off again? I have half a mind to ship you off to your grandmother. Then after that, she said, I told you that he was bad news. You have 3 choices here. You can either go to California, to your other grandparents, or you can go to Minnesota and you could live with your dad. But as all this was happening, the police were searching around in the house. And when the police found suitcases that were all packed and all ready to go, including one suitcase that Susan had never even seen before that was full of knives, she finally kind of hit her breaking point. She's like, you know what? Jennifer slept in her clothes last night. She was up all night. And Jennifer said, well, yeah, I just couldn't sleep, which Susan replied back saying, no lying, no more. Then the police played some of the voicemail messages on Jennifer's phone because Marilee's mom had called her wanting to know more about what was going on with Marilee, because remember, there was that attempted stabbing and it had just been the morning before. But Jennifer hadn't called her back. So now it seemed almost like things were kind of starting to click for Susan. She had heard those voicemails that were played for her from Marilee's mom about the stabbing incident, asking questions about Marilee. She sees a suitcase that she's never seen before that's full of knives. Her kid's been acting weird, all of these different things. And the police also found some pretty big knives just sitting around the house, also Paul's wallet. So at this point, Susan's putting everything together, and she all of a sudden also realized that that pudding had been poisoned. I mean, I guess right up until this point, she believed Jennifer's story about the milk being bad and that that's why it had that chemical taste. But then once she learned about the knives and everybody else and everything else, it was like she suddenly realized what her daughter was capable of. She even told the police that she thought that she had been poisoned. Plus, the cops had all of these knives right in front of them. I mean, it was a disaster. But they decided for whatever reason not to follow up on any of it. They figured they were just there to find Paul, and since he wasn't there anymore and neither was the gun, so far as they could tell, they moved on. Then, 2 days later on September 26th, Susan didn't show up for her shift at Bed Bath & Beyond. And that was completely unlike her. I mean, she never missed work ever. And I know in some retail jobs, people can be kind of flaky, but even Susan's boss knew that this just was not like her. She wouldn't blow off a shift. So he tried calling her, and when she didn't pick up, he reached out to her emergency contact, which was her mother, Kate. And as soon as Kate got on the phone with Susan's manager, she was like, you know what? I haven't heard from Susan either. And then she tried calling Jennifer and David, the 2 kids, because if Susan was hurt or sick or something like that, they surely would know. They'd be able to keep her in the loop on what was going on and fill her in. But they didn't answer either. Nobody was picking up their cell phone, and the landline at the home just rang and rang and rang. I mean, clearly something was very wrong. And Kate just had this terrible feeling. So she called the police and she asked for a welfare check. But when they showed up at Susan's house, they didn't see any obvious red flags. There were no signs of a break-in, the door was still closed and locked, the front porch light was still on even, and when they knocked, nobody answered. So the police figured that maybe Susan and the kids had gone out of town for a little trip. I mean, that's something that happens, right? Sometimes people plan vacations. They don't tell everybody that they're going to be gone. They don't tell their friends or family members. They don't, and then sometimes people get worried over nothing. I mean, her car wasn't in the driveway, so that was evidence that fit within that idea that Jennifer, David, and she were all on this road trip somewhere together. But of course, if Susan really was on a vacation with her kids, she probably would have told her boss. She never blowed off work. That's just who she was. But remember, the cops didn't know her. They didn't know that that was out of character for her, so it didn't seem like a red flag, and they just left. So later, they called back Kate, and they explained their reasoning, how they figured that it was no big deal. But Kate didn't buy it, and she spent the entire rest of that night calling everyone over and over again, hoping somebody would pick up. And when she still hadn't heard from anyone by the next morning, she requested another welfare check. But it was basically just a repeat of the first one. I mean, the police showed up, they looked around the outside, they left the house without actually getting into the house. I mean, there was nothing they could do. But finally, on September 29th, they got a tip that they could not ignore. And I'm gonna come back and tell you what that tip is a little bit later, but for now, I just want to tell you what they saw when they finally went into Susan's house. I mean, first of all, there was the odor. It was like a combination of rotting body and cleaning supplies. Like somebody had died there and then somebody else had done a very half-assed job cleaning up after it. The house was also completely full of blood. It was splattered on the walls, on the floors, everywhere. That electrical cable that we talked about earlier was also dangling over the tub, but there was nobody in there. Now, knowing what we do know about that plan with Jennifer, Paul, and the others, the ones that they had made, it almost seemed like they had everything set up to actually shock Susan when she got into the tub, except Susan wasn't in there. So something had not gone according to plan here. Instead, the tub had water, one knife, and cell phones in it. So presumably, somebody had tried to throw those phones in the water to try and destroy whatever data they had on them. And in fact, the cell phones had some kind of chemical cleaner all over them. The police could smell it even after they had been removed from underwater and had been in underwater this whole time. So reading between the lines, it sounds like maybe whoever did this was trying to get rid of DNA or fingerprints. And there's one more thing I want to say about this setup with the electrical cord in the tub. When the police looked at it, at the kind of cord that it was and how it was all set up, they realized that there was no way for this cord to actually kill Susan. It might have hurt her, or it made her, uncomfortable a little bit, but it wasn't powerful enough to deliver a fatal, electric shock or jolt. Now, when I was talking about Susan's kids' plan to kill her, and when I said that they were dumb, I truly meant it. They were dumb. Because besides that electrical cord, there were weapons all over the place. There was a wooden bat in one room, knives all over the place, including one tucked into the cushions of the couch. There was the poisoned pudding still sitting in the fridge. And remember that gun that Paul's father had noticed was missing? The police didn't find it right away, but they did eventually find it in the attic. So basically, everywhere you turned, there was something that could kill you. There was a weapon, there was a piece of evidence, there was a clue. It was truly like a house of horrors. And the police also found, which this is very, very weird, but they found a pile of hair and a pair of scissors. Bizarre. So finally, they went upstairs and they turned down a hallway. And that is where they found Susan. Her throat had been slit, and she had also been stabbed 26 times. She was dead, and clearly had been dead for quite some time based on how her body had been decaying. She was just face down on the floor in her own home, and it had been days since she had been killed. And during that time, her blood had soaked all the way through her clothing, so much so that it turned them black. I mean, that is seriously how much blood she lost. It also soaked into the carpet that she was lying on top of. Now, whoever had killed her had dumped that same chemical on her body that was on the cell phones. I mean, somebody went to the effort to try and clean up this crime scene. Not very obviously, of course, because their fingerprints were in the blood all over the house, and they clearly hadn't done anything to get rid of the evidence, the fingerprints, the weapons, none of that, but it appeared they did try. So, of course, the police wanted to figure out who had done this. Who was the killer? Not that it was too hard to figure out. Now, besides the fingerprints, I also mentioned before that the house had smelled very strongly of cleaning chemicals. And in no time at all, the detectives found a receipt from Walmart. And Walmart security cameras showed David biking over there, buying a bunch of supplies, coming back all within the past few days. And that pile of hair, it was Paul's. Which you may be wondering why he would cut his hair after potentially murdering his girlfriend's mom. Well, the police figured that he, David, and Jennifer had all skipped town after the murder, that they had dumped their phones in the tub so that they would be harder to track, and that maybe Paul had cut his hair off so that it would make him less recognizable. But in the end, I mean, honestly, they were only really gathering evidence to support theories that they had. The police had basically already kind of solved this crime, but now they needed to have enough proof to move forward with pressing charges, taking them to court, getting a conviction, getting justice, seeing if their theories were even right. But in fact, what's so crazy is they already had the killers in custody. So let me back up. Like I said before, the main reason they went to Susan's house that day was because they got that tip that they couldn't ignore. And it had come from police all the way on the other side of the country in South Dakota. Because that's where David, Jennifer, and Paul were at around 3:30 a.m. that same morning. That's how far they had been able to get with that small amount of cash that they had stolen from Susan after they killed her. And it actually wasn't a whole lot of money. I mean, not at all. By the time they even got to South Dakota, they didn't even have enough money left to fill up the tank. So because of that, they tried to steal gas, but they got caught and the police showed up. So their getaway plan wasn't even thought out. Like, they didn't have enough money to even get there. They ended up getting caught, not because of the murder, but because they tried to steal gas for the getaway. Now, in addition to the fact that these, truly brilliant criminal masterminds were trying to rip off a gas station, they were also doing it in a town that had a curfew for kids under 18. And all three of them were still under 18. Jennifer was about a week away from her birthday, but technically she was still a minor. So anyway, the cops at first figured, okay, they're just joyriding. Maybe they had snuck out at night without their parents' permission, doing all of those things. But when they ran the plates and saw that the car was actually from Texas, the South Dakota cops were like, okay, something weird is happening here. So then they called the department in Roanoke to basically just say, hey, we found a car that belongs to somebody from your neck of the woods. Her name is Susan Bailey. Do you have any idea of what's going on here? And the Roanoke police started to put this together, and they took it way more seriously because now they had this report that the kids were 750 miles away. They saw that there had been 2 welfare checks on Susan's house. And so they decided, now at this moment, we need to get inside that house. We need to try to figure out how all of this fits together. And then once those Roanoke police officers found Susan's body, they got the word back to South Dakota, where Jennifer, David, and Paul all were currently being held. And now they were being held for murder without bail. Plus, when police searched Jennifer and David's house, they saw a bunch of stuff that belonged to Mary Lee, including her school ID. So then they decided to investigate Mary Lee, who, for the record, was still in jail for those aggravated assault charges against her mother. The police at this point knew that Mary Lee didn't have anything to do with Susan's murder because it seemed like Susan probably died on the night of the 25th or just after midnight the next morning, which was based on a few things. I mean, first, she was at work on the closing shift that night. She was reported missing the next morning. I mean, it was pretty straightforward. But also, when Susan died, she was still in her clothes from work. Her Bed Bath & Beyond name tag was still pinned to her shirt. So the point with that is Mary Lee was arrested on the 23rd, about 2.5 days before Susan died. So clearly she wasn't involved. But it did still seem like way too much of a coincidence that one girl would try to stab her mom and then all of her stuff would be at the home of another mom who also had apparently been killed through a stabbing and by her kids and her daughter's boyfriend. I mean, there was just too many similarities, right? So sure enough, when the police asked Mary Lee about it, she folded. She told them everything. She couldn't talk about Susan's murder specifically, of course, because she wasn't there for it, but she did talk about her throuple with Jennifer and Paul / Talos, the other weird personality in there. And she talked about their whole plan to flee to Canada, which is probably where I have to think the other 3 people were headed when they got stopped in South Dakota. But anyway, since Mary Lee was so cooperative, the police only charged her with the aggravated assault against her mom, not for any part or role in planning Susan's murder or for Paul's attempted murder of his parents. So she spent 5 years on probation. That's it. 5 years for trying to kill someone and for helping plan another successful murder. David pled guilty to murder, and because he was so young, he was sentenced to only 26 years in prison. So he's going to be 40 years old when his sentence is over in 2034, which is so completely wild to me. You can serve a whole complete murder sentence and then still walk free when you're 40 years old. He's going to have a huge chunk of his life just out free. Now, Paul agreed to a plea bargain where he admitted that he was guilty of murder and then he got the 60-year sentence. But the maximum sentence for a minor who commits murder in Texas is life without parole. So because he took that plea deal, he actually got a pretty sweet deal, especially since he'll be eligible for parole after 30 years. So not too long after David gets out. So after his sentence was finalized, the police gave Paul a chance to give a full confession. They just wanted to know the specifics of how and why Susan had died. And now that the charges were settled, there was no reason for him to lie anymore. So they pull him into an interrogation room, and right away he kind of starts to go back into this whole like personality disorder or multiple personality disorders, and like starts to bring that up. But right away the detective shuts it down. He's like, no, don't even start that shit with me, and basically like calls him out on it. And sure enough, as soon as he got called out on it, he stops. The jig is up. He remains Paul for the rest of the interrogation and doesn't even try to pull the personality thing anymore, which clearly indicates it was all bull to begin with, right? Which I think we all knew. But anyway, Paul said that everything was Jennifer's idea all along, that she wanted her mom dead, and that she played Paul to manipulate him into killing Susan for her. And on the day of the murder, he says that Jennifer led Susan up to the top of the stairs where Paul and David were waiting, and then they attacked her with knives. And then all three of them just stabbed her to death together. Now, Jennifer also agreed to a plea deal, but there was more drama there because the plea deal didn't just require her to confess to committing the murder. She also had to explain how and why she did it, just like Paul had done. But when Jennifer went to her sentencing hearing on October 15th, 2009, she didn't want to explain anything because, according to her, she hadn't done anything wrong. And she was actually trying to argue that everything was Paul and David's fault, or not everything. Jennifer still admitted that she had helped with the plan of her mom's murder, but she said she hadn't been serious about it. She thought it was all this big joke. She didn't know that they were actually going to do anything with it. And according to Jennifer, on the day of the murder, David was the one who stabbed Susan. She turned on her little brother. Jennifer says she was too shocked and stunned at first to do anything, but then when she tried to call 911 to help her mom, Paul's the one who stopped her from reaching out for help. Now, the good news is the judge wasn't buying any of it, and he basically told Jennifer that if she wanted to get a lighter sentence from the plea deal, that she had to tell the truth. So she took a few days to think about it, and then she went back to court the next week, and she explained everything. And that story matched the evidence and everything that the police had already figured out. So this time, in the true version of events, Jennifer said that she, Paul, and David all knew exactly what they were planning to do that night. Paul was at her house. He had been staying there for a few days, all without Susan knowing. And like always, Susan was doing these long shifts at work, so she wasn't able to really pick up on those things. And that is what was used to their advantage. While Susan was out of the house at her job, they unplugged every single landline in the house. That way she wouldn't be able to call 911 once they started attacking her. They really had everything planned. Now, Susan's shift lasted almost to midnight, but David wasn't able to stay up that late. So he went to sleep, and Paul was sleeping in Jennifer's room. So Jennifer was the only one who was actually still awake when Susan got back. But then she woke up Paul, and he's the one who stabbed Susan to death while Jennifer just sat there and watched. She still claimed that she didn't do any of the stabbings or beatings herself, but she at least admitted that she had been in on it the entire time. But ultimately, between all of the different versions of the story that everybody was spinning, here's what the police were able to determine. They believed that all three of them stabbed Susan because there was enough difference in the stab wounds on Susan's body that the medical examiner knew that it wasn't just one person or even two people, that it was multiple people based on the way the stab wounds were. They believed that they took turns slashing her, also beating her with that wooden bat that the police later found at the scene, and that they stood in a circle around her, just stabbing and crushing and eventually slitting her throat, not stopping until she was dead. Now, even though Jennifer never admitted to those details, her judge did let her plea bargain stand. So she had the exact same sentence as Paul, 60 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30. All three of them, Paul, Jennifer, and David, are still in prison to this day. But this is interesting and frustrating because even after she gave her confession, Jennifer went back to saying that she was innocent, that it wasn't fair for her to be convicted for the murder when David and Paul were the ones who did it. And nobody close to the case actually believed her, though. Jennifer's own grandparents have even publicly said many times they think she's a liar and they think she's a murderer. But like so many convicts do, Jennifer has also claimed that she found Jesus, that she's a better person now. Which isn't it always so convenient how people find faith after they've been found guilty? And the thing that really gets me with this case in particular is that Susan worked so hard to give her kids the best life that she could, and they hated her for it. Not that this would have been okay if Susan was a bad mom or a neglectful mom, but she did everything for her kids. She lived in a state that she didn't like. She worked endless hours, multiple jobs, did everything she could, but because she wanted better for her daughter and didn't want her daughter dating that boyfriend, they resented her for it, killed her for it. It's horrific. I mean, truly unforgivable. It is such a stupid and pointless reason and way to die. Over what? And like, I get it. Their full frontal lobes or whatever probably aren't developed at that young of an age, but like, still, it's like, just, what's the word I'm looking for? Not the audacity of it all, but like the entitlement of it all. It's so sick and so twisted. So I'm curious if they have any remorse today. I'm wondering if now that they're grown and they're adults and they have a full functioning brain, like, do they feel remorse? Do they realize what they did was so crazy and such an overreaction? Or do they still justify it in some way? And I guess my biggest question too is, does Jennifer still think she's going to be reincarnated with Paul? Are they still like talking? I wonder if they are. I don't know. I hope not. Because then when they get out, I feel like they'll just fuel each other's fire. But I guess only time will tell. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning into another episode of 10 to Life. I know this wasn't a wild one, so I appreciate it. And I will be back with another one very soon. But until then, stay safe.